Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host Raghunath and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to the show, and welcome to Sleep In Saturday. We do this show at 8 o'clock. If you're listening to this on Facebook, welcome. We do this actually every day, but Saturday and Sunday we do it at 8 o'clock. Today was a weird day because I was doing an online yoga festival. Yes, that's how we do yoga festivals nowadays. We do them all online. My whole existence is virtual. You know what I'm reading now, Kaustubha? I'm reading 1984 by George Orwell.
I read that when I was a kid.
I did too. And you know what? It's getting more and more real. Getting more and more real. Does anybody feel like that? If you're listening on Zoom, give me a thumbs up if you're feeling like this is 1984. Yeah, I know. It's almost creepy, truthfully. Anyway, I'm glad we're connecting through this Zoom class. If you want to join us on Zoom class, just email our assistant, Mara, wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com. She will collect your information and send you various secretive passcodes to enter into our chamber, and then you can be our friend. You have to give a little bit of your blood and send it in, and then we'll send us some of your...
Creepy.
Yeah, it's like a secret society.
Secret societies are creepy.
Listen, if you don't want to do that, you can listen to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or other various ways. You know, truthfully, we are what we put into our head on our downtime. What do you think about that? We are what we put into our head on our downtime. We got a lot of downtime. I walk around my property, mowing lawn, cutting grass, and I'm just like playing like lectures in my head, you know? And if you're playing some other crazy podcast, sometimes you play podcasts or movies or something, they just take your mind to dark, crazy places. I want my mind to take me higher. You can deliver yourself with your mind, or you can degrade yourself with your mind. That's what Krishna says in the Gita. That's our options, really. Deliver yourself with your mind, or degrade yourself with your mind. So Kaustubha and myself, we're trying to do this podcast so people can, we can binge listen to the Srimad Bhagavatam on a regular basis. And we find that it connects us, makes us feel grounded, makes us feel whole, and makes us understand ourselves underneath this world of false identities having to do with the material body, the color of your skin, your gender, your political party. None of them's us. We are pure spirit souls. Are you ready to dive into question day, my friend?
I'm ready to dive into question day, and I have a question for you.
Ooh, from Tristram
Davidson via email. You ready?
Yeah.
Tristram writes, on selfless service, how do you set healthy boundaries whilst surrendering to be in service for others? What does whilst mean again? It doesn't mean while, does it?
Whilst.
I looked it up once, I forgot.
Whilst. It's Shakespearean.
Yes.
It's a conjunction during the same time that, or at the same time as.
Okay, so it does mean while.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do that
I'm
in
going to
modern
start
English.
using whilst again.
Bring it back.
Bring that back into the.
On
Okay.
selfless service, how do you set healthy boundaries while surrendering to be in service for others? How do you know if it's pushing your limits or it's your ego trying to resist full surrender? Do you have examples of this while being a monk?
Great question.
Okay.
Great question. Well, being a monk is one thing, and that's like maybe a separate answer. But first of all, everybody needs healthy boundaries. That's why there's yamas and niyamas, or rules and regulations of our own self-protection. We ourselves are carrying God around in our heart. So therefore, it's my job to keep my body safe, to keep my mind safe, right? And to keep my actions safe. And that doesn't mean we don't want to give and give love. But it's the same old thing, like first you got to put on the oxygen mask of yourself before you can put the oxygen mask on your child in the airplane. So there is definitely self-care that goes on in bhakti yoga. Nowadays, people they give themselves so much, but they get exploited. And so then they back off and they go into this self-care where it just becomes like pampering. That becomes almost beyond self-care. Real self-care is you wake up early, you chant some good, solid japa meditation. That's really good self-care. You're careful what you put in your ears. You're careful what you put in your mind. You're careful what you put in your mouth. You're careful who you hang out with, because the people that you hang out with are influencing you. This is real self-care. It's not necessarily a bubble bath or stuff like that. Of course, we want to do that stuff, take care of the body, but not just to pamper the body. It's because the body is a gift of material nature. And therefore, I want to take care of it so I can give back. I don't want to do so much yoga that I become so flexible that and so strong that everybody thinks I'm cool, and that's where that's a home run for me in yoga. No, the body's maintained and cared for and loved and detoxed and cleansed so we can use the body to give back. Now, as far as like service, hey, all you got to really do, and we're going to get into this in my next question I got too, which almost could be wrapped up into this question. But first taking care of your own personal meditation, and then you want to find a way to serve. And a lot of you guys I know, like Mara, does all this service for Wisdom of the Sages. She's not on a payroll. Actually, this is a great example.
Mara,
she's not on a payroll here, but she does a lot of work behind the scenes that people don't see. After the class, she gets on with Kaustubha. They talk about stuff. They name the things. They upload it. It's tedious. Tedious. No, you don't do that? I don't even know what's going on. They download it. What do you do? Download it or upload it? You're doing something.
we don't normally talk to each other, but I write up a description. I send it to her, but she's kind of like doing some editing and uploading of videos. It's a lot of work, actually. It takes time to load it up.
Did I just say that?
Well, you said we meet together or something like that. We don't meet together.
Okay, we don't meet. All right. Well, that being said, they do stuff behind the scenes. Now, at a certain point with Mara, she's going to say, you know what? This is cutting into my like business. I can't make a living doing this because I'm doing too much work and it's cutting into my day-to-day that I need to make my bills, etc. So, I have this conversation with Mara, and I have it with anybody who sort of renders service. We want to do some things that are actually seva. That I don't want anything back. I don't want anything in return for. I just want to do it as service. And then there's a certain thing that at a certain point where if I do this much, okay, I'm going to pay you to do that. And so sometimes there's a paid service that's also helping a spiritual mission. And then there's certain things that you just want to choose to do that you just want to give. So I think everyone's got to have their own criteria for how much they can actually give of their free time. And then, for example, we need people who are like sometimes assistants that have to be paid. And we have to pay them. And that's a good thing. And they get to use their work in helping us, and we appreciate it. But there's certain times that they want to just say, well, I have a talent and I want to just give this as service. So you have to be able to dial in for yourself what you can afford to give. And some of you guys don't have time to give or a particular talent to give, but you donate towards the show. That's a huge service. because it helps me literally put the basta pasula in my child's mouth. You know what I mean? It just helps me survive. So that's a service also. And then there's going to be a point where you're like, I like this show and I want to support it, but I can't afford anything. I give $1, or I can't afford, but I'll just show up, or I'll write letters of encouragement, whatever it is. But you should have some type of spiritual mission. I'm not even saying it's Wisdom of the Sages. It could be anything in your community, a temple, or whatever that you want to render some service to in a loving way. And then there's certain things that it's going to be too much, and you're going to have to say, I have to back off at a certain point. Because, in the case of some like Mara or other people who render service to the show, I never want that person to feel taken advantage of. That's the worst thing. So if you're in the position like me and Kaustubha, we never want that feeling. And you don't want to work in that feeling with resentment. You don't want to give with resentment, right? And the 17th chapter talks about that. You got those verses off the top of your head?
Which ones now?
It's charity in the gunas.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just in general, it's saying that when you want something back, that's in the mode of passion.
Yeah.
When you're doing it in order to get something for yourself, even that may be prestige or whatever. If you're doing it to the wrong person at the wrong place at the wrong time without any proper understanding, that's in the mode of ignorance.
Yeah.
But when it's done selflessly, when it's done at the right time for the right cause, without any expectation of anything in return, that's the sattvic charity.
Yeah, and that sattvic charity is like, that's why we were saying yesterday, and it's not like we say it yesterday, we say it all the time, that giving knowledge is the highest charity. Why? Because it changes people's direction in life. It changes their false perceptions of reality and helps them move through reality. Thank you. It's Bhagavad Gita 17:20 through 22. Was that a good answer? Now, as a monk, it's a little bit different, right? Kaustubha, it means sort of like anything goes. When you sign up for monk,
monks, you can drive them into the ground.
You can drive them into the ground. I mean, you got to also have some type of. But basically, if you have a good person that's over you, you just, you trust them and you just do it. You just.
I'll say this. What you mentioned about caring for oneself and the body being a temple and all that, that's all important to understand. And I think, when we, Tristram was asking for guidelines, how do we know when we're pushing it too far? And I think when our health starts to fall apart, that's a good sign, and another sign is when we can't do it so well anymore, when we're,
Well, I think there's a tendency for women to give too much. Like whenever this comes up with my wife hears it, she's like, what women, is my wife saying, women need a different answer to this, because women are they are just giving beings. And unless there's a type of parameters, you have to put up, there's got to be healthy. You cannot get beat up and then continue on with your service. There has to be a point where you say, no, I have to protect myself. That's why I meant to say, if there's some safety involved and there's if you're crossing that line, then you've gone too far. You're giving, but you're actually getting abused psychologically, physically, etc.
Yeah. So I was saying, if it's affecting your health, that's that's one thing. If you're if you're unrested or unwell in such a way that you're not even doing that service well anymore, then that's a good sign that you need to slow down.
Yeah.
But the thing I want to share is, my point is, the great souls that I've known in life, right? Those people that I've really respected, those people that I think really had the deepest spiritual understanding, and they really work out. They really engage intensely. They push themselves, and I admire that. So I'm not
giving the opposite answer, but it's a good point. It's a good point.
But it requires balance, obviously, right? But my point is not to forget that that's really what it means to give yourself entirely. You really go for it. And again, the people that I've seen that really have the deepest wisdom and the deepest spiritual understanding, I see they really work hard.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
That was a good one, I think.
Yeah. Next question.
Okay. Kaustubha, your mic is like. Do you hear that, Mara? It's not loud. It's blowing out a little. Do you hear that, or is that just me?
Didn't notice it.
No, you don't notice it? Okay. All right. This is from Harshal Gore. Harshal Gore is from the UK, and he's writing via email, which is wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com. Firstly, he says, I would love to do this in an English accent, but I don't have it. I'd like to say that Wisdom of the Sages has been a lifeline for me during 2020. Every evening I listen to the show, and it's given me the regular connection to Bhakti. You guys are doing amazing service. Don't underestimate the light you're giving to the world right now. I needed that encouragement today. Thank you. We've had a hard few weeks in the UK. We've been living through another hard national lockdown. We've had some hope with vaccine news, but mostly people are living in fear. Cases and deaths rapidly increasing. So to my question, you mentioned the other day that lamentation, fearfulness, and illusions plague the jiva. I want to focus on fear. This year, more than ever, has been fearful for so many people around the world and continues to be uncertain going into 2020. COVID illnesses, financial pressures, job uncertainty, not seeing loved ones, kids' educations disrupted. Bhagavad Gita 10:4 to 10:5, Krishna says, fearlessness, mentions having fearlessness quality. When there is so much uncertainty, it's really hard to tap into this quality. I'm not sure how to unlock it. I've been reading a lot about Srila Prabhupada and Shama Sundar Das recently in the book Chasing Rhinos. Both are incredibly fearless. They created a movement, and it took massive risks to spread this message of Krishna globally at the time when there was no technology, lots of discrimination, and very little money. What special fearless powers did they have? What lessons can we take from them to be more fearless during these challenging times? Harshal Gore, that was a beautiful question.
It was a beautiful question. So always love Harshal's questions.
Yeah.
So he's asking about fearless powers. And really, what I feel is that fearlessness has a lot to do with having already given up the idea, having already given up faith in the material world as a provider of happiness and security. If I'm looking towards material circumstances to provide me my happiness and my security, then I'm going to be fearful, because the nature of the material energy is that it's always shifting. So it seems okay one minute, and then it doesn't seem okay the next minute. If I've already given up on that, if I've already said I have no hope, I have no faith in the material world providing for me security, as a matter of fact, I'm convinced that the material world is going to provide instability, right? If I go into it with that perspective, right, that I know for a fact that even if things seem stable right now, at any moment they can shift and it could become very unstable. If that's my perspective and my understanding, then when it does shift, I'm already ready for it. I'm expecting it. I'm anticipating it already. The problem is that everybody has faith in material circumstances to provide their security for them or to provide their happiness for them. And so as soon as, we work to try to set it up just right, and then as soon as it starts to shift, the fear sets in, right? But if I already know that it's going to shift, if I already am anticipating it, expecting it to shift, then when it shifts, I'm not fearful, because I was anticipating that, and I've placed my faith in another source of security, and that's in God, right? So if I've already given up the idea that there's security in any given material construct, then when the things shift, I'm steady. And that's really what it means to surrender. It doesn't mean, and what I'm saying, it doesn't mean that we don't do what we need to do on the material end, but it means that we take all reasonable precautions, and then we leave the rest in the hands of God, right?
I like that.
Yeah, so that's the formula, and that's what surrender means. And in other words, I'm going to take all reasonable precautions, and then God, whatever happens, I leave up to you. Oh, the whole world's going to shift, and COVID's going to set in, and it's going to affect me financially, and it's going to affect, the education of my children. There's nothing I can do about that except take the reasonable precautions and then leave it in the hands of God, and if I can do that, it's that faith actually that gives that fearlessness. There's a verse about fearlessness in Bhagavatam.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of the one I'm thinking of?
Give me a hint.
Well, it was spoken by Lord Shiva.
Oh, in the Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
I can't think.
Okay. That wasn't there. As soon as I said you're thinking Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, I was thinking Bhagavad Gita. I thought it was.
What is it? Narayana parasarve nakutas chanya bibiti svarga apavarga nardakeshu apitulyarta darshana. That devotees, those that have devoted their lives to God, are solely engaged in devotional service to Lord Narayana parasarve. They never fear any condition of life. For them, Svarga, the heavenly planets, Apavarga, liberation or salvation, you could say, and Nardakeshu, or in hell, whether they're, in the heavenly planets, whether they're liberated, whether they're in the hellish planets, Apitulyarta Darshan, they see it all equally, It's all the same to them. And in the commentary to that, you see, the story to that is that there was this friend of Lord Shiva, very exalted friend of his, named Chitraketu, right? And Chitraketu's, Parvati was sitting on the lap of Shiva, but kind of like in a very public way, which in the Vedic culture is unusual, right? I think even Shiva was kind of like speaking, lecturing to his followers and all that, but meanwhile he had his wife sitting on his lap. So Chitraketu made a comment about that in a friendly way, but Parvati took it the wrong way and cursed him to become a demon, and to take birth in a different body, that of a demon, and Chitraketu, although he had the power to counteract the curse or to counter curse, he just accepted it without any fear, without any anger, And then Lord Shiva quoted this verse to Parvati saying, just see, those that have fully given their lives to Lord Vishnu, they have no fear. They see all the external shiftings. They see it all equally. And that's how we have to train our mind. If we train our mind that way, then when these things shift, we're watching it from a much broader perspective. Rather than feeling like I'm in the middle of a house that's falling apart, we're like way above the house looking down on it, knowing that it's just a matter of time before that house falls apart. But we're secure, we're secure. And it takes faith, but the devotee is cultivating that faith through their hearing and how they interpret their life at every step. So it becomes firmer and firmer and firmer and firmer until no matter what situation they're in, they're feeling the hand of God in it. And what usually our cases is we hear this kind of philosophy, we may think, oh, that's appealing. I like that idea. I want to live that way. I feel like I am one of those devotees. But usually we have our feet in two boats, right?
Right.
Like you have one foot in that, like, yes, I like that perspective, and it's a fact. Everything material is temporary, and I get that. But we also have one foot on that. I want my material security. I have faith that my happiness lies there. And so it's like you have a foot in one boat and a foot in another boat. And what Krishna will do to us is he'll start to separate those two, and make you choose which way are you going to step.
That's happened, Kaustubha, a lot in our training when we were younger, because sometimes, you're doing something, you're acting in a spiritual way, and people go, I really like what you're doing. I really think what you're doing is a good thing. And you think, yeah, I'm getting a pat on the back. And then sometimes the guru will say something like, that thing you did, it's complete nonsense what you did. And you realize, oh, you're right, I did that with my ego. And then sometimes we would get chastised for things we didn't even do. And those are the times, like sort of like Chitraketu is he's getting chastised. It wasn't even his intention.
Right.
That is the hardest, when you feel like I didn't even do it wrong. That's when your ego really digs in, like, oh, you don't get it. How dare you say that to me? And you have to really work through it. That bitterness that comes when we have some type of like chastisement by guru or just the energy of the material world, and we feel like I didn't deserve this, to just say, you know what? This is here for my purification. This is this, we become actually a transcendentalist.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's how it is. Yeah, you gotta get pushed a little, right? And Prabhupada, he writes in the commentary to that verse, he says, Parvati might naturally have inquired how devotees become so exalted, right? Even they're living in a world that's fallen apart around them. And he says, therefore, this verse explains that they are Narayana Para, simply dependent on Narayan, simply dependent on Lord Vishnu. They do not mind reverses in life because in the service of Narayan, they have learned to tolerate whatever hardship there may be. They do not care whether they are in heaven or in hell. They simply engage in the service of the Lord. This is their excellence. Right? This is the excellence of the yogi, that no matter the external situations, my faith is so deep. Even if I get COVID, my faith is deep, right? Even if it, these things hit very close to home, because I'm expecting, it's just a matter of time before I leave this body. It's just a matter of time, whatever I have before I lose it. And at that point, there's nothing left for me but God. But I've cultivated that relationship and that faith so strong that I'm never feeling insecure and I'm never feeling fear.
Can I tell a funny story?
Yeah.
In this regard? Okay, so I was a monk, and I was sitting in a bus. You might even know this, but it's a funny story. And I was sitting with my back to this window. It's a bus that held like 18 people. And there's two swamis sitting across from me. And this one swami was a little angry. He was a little, he's not a swami anymore. He was a little angry. And I was sitting, and the window was open, and they were celebrating Holi. So Holi is when sometimes they literally stop buses and they throw powder on you and they throw colored water on you and it stains your clothes, but it's all considered sort of a religious holiday. So if you're familiar with Indian culture, you know what Holi is. But what they were doing at this point, when cars would drive by, they would take a big bucket of water and then they have like a measuring cup and they throw it at all the cars coming by. So the window behind my head was open. And as we were approaching about 50 feet away, the Swami stands up and he looks at me and he goes, "Close the window. They're celebrating Holi right now. Close the window." No, he actually just said one. He said, "Close the window. They're celebrating Holi right now." But he said it, as soon as he said it, I turned to close the window. But I tell you, these guys, they threw the entire bucket. I literally watched a bucket of blue water go by my face, miss everybody in the entire bus, and land all over the Swami. From the head to the toe, he was covered in blue. And he looked at me and he goes, "You jackass! I told you 3 times to shut that window." And in my mind, I thought, "No, you didn't. You didn't tell me 3 times. You told me once and I shut it." But I didn't say anything.
Okay.
I didn't fight it. I just took it. I was like, okay, this is one of those moments where I feel like I was in the right, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to take it. Those are my big growth experiences, Kaustubha. What do you think about that?
I think you grew nicely, Raghunath.
Henry remembers that story.
Sherry is sharing that actually I didn't know this, but Sherry got COVID. She says the only time I felt safe and secure when I got COVID was when I gave up. Right, when you let go.
I like that.
I realized that my life was I realized that my life was in Krishna's hands, and it felt easier somehow, even though I was so incredibly ill. Who knew letting go could be such a relief? Right, it takes that perspective that you cultivate, and then you let go. It's a fact. Amazing.
That's actually a beautiful story.
Yeah.
That is the beautiful story. Like that's the beautiful story of spiritual life. Let go, let God. Thank you for sharing that.
Let go, let God. Okay, you ready?
Let go, let God. Tattoo there. Hashtag that one. So that's probably a pretty big hashtag already.
Yeah. Okay, this is from Bob Hollowell from Philadelphia.
Oh, I like him.
He says, here's my question. How do you balance being a householder and a devotee? I have a 6-year-old who I am at home with all day, helping her homeschooling while still putting in 8 hours a day remotely. Right? This is another one of the pressures of the lockdown, right? Of COVID. My wife works in a hospital here in Philadelphia and has been working very long hours, and most nights not getting home until between 7 and 8 p.m. I'm therefore responsible for waking my daughter up. providing her 3 square meals, helping with school and homework, bathing her, and getting her to bed. By 8 p.m., I'm spent. Okay. Despite being inundated with being a dad, I still manage to get in at least 8 rounds a day, chanting japa, 8 rounds a day. That's about an hour worth of chanting or so. I've been doing the Dhammadarastaka each night. Beautiful, a little Kartik practice, singing that devotional song. And I'm doing the Chad Gita reading at night. That means reading a chapter of Gita every night. And I get to the temple 2 or 3 times per week. I don't know how. It's impressive.
This guy's incredible.
Yeah.
He's doing so much better than me.
He says, I'm not here to get accolades. I write because even although I do those things while balancing being a father, I do not feel as if I'm doing enough service for Krishna. I'm not doing enough service, he's thinking. Is this just the bhakti/devotee mindset? Any help would be appreciated.
That's great. What a great story. It's so tough, especially when you're watching a little kid. Like I've been watching a 6-year-old too a lot. And the 6-year-old just wants to talk to you and tell you, here, you want to hear my dream from last night? And my brain, I'm like, please, don't tell me the dream. Don't tell me the dream. I'm trying to jam my japa. Please don't tell me the dream. I went on a japa walk yesterday way up the road, and I just see my 6-year-old running behind me, wait up! And it just became tell me the dreams and tell me different things, ask me questions. What is a lawsuit? Tell me what a lawsuit is. I'm just like, there goes my japa. I think we have to reframe out what being a good devotee is also.
Okay.
Right? That's a big one. Reframe out, what does it mean to be a good devotee?
Because someone might think it means being at the temple, doing some specific type of service.
A friend said that to me once because I remember I brought Sachi and Rocco, who were little kids, to the temple from upstate New York. I was in New York by myself with 2 little kids. I figured I need a kirtan in my life. There was a big kirtan at the Bhakti Center. And I just tell you, the kids, when they were little, they would not sit still. They were running all over the place. It was packed. I couldn't catch them. All I wanted was just to sit and hear the kirtan. And when I left, a friend of mine just said, he said, how was your night? I said, I couldn't control the kids. I couldn't concentrate. I just feel like I just want to be a devotee. And he just said, maybe you should rethink what it means to be a devotee. It was really beautiful advice. And I will say, for the second point is, we call it a God-shaped hole. There's a God-shaped hole in the heart that people are putting in different things in their heart. They're putting in adventure or fame or money. And the more money I make, the more money I want. It's not like money satiates me. They'll put in sex. The more sex I have, the more partners I have, the more I want. It's not like it satiates me. The more travel I do, my bucket list, I've been here, the more. It's not like things of the material world satiate you. Krishna is the same exact way as the material things. No amount of chanting, no amount of pilgrimage, no amount of bhakti, it's not like you read the Bhagavatam and you're like, now I'm satiated, I'm perfect. Krishna is the exact same thing, or bhakti is the exact same thing as far as satiation goes, but there's difference. Your desperate attempt to satiate yourself in the material world degrades the consciousness. The desperate attempt to put Krishna in that God-shaped hole. Krishna, what he's doing is he's luring you out of the material world, Bob Hollowell. So even you're chanting, you are controlling your senses, you're raising your daughter, you're doing all these dharmic duties while your wife is working overtime, you're visiting the temple, your energy and your consciousness is affecting your entire household. Krishna is lifting up your consciousness. It's insatiable, that desire to want to serve Krishna. But look what's happening. You're getting lured out of the material world. Look at yourself compared to where you were 3 years ago. If you were using that same, I can't get enough, if I'm using my same thing, I love to gamble. So I'm going to sneak away from my family to gamble. I have to take care of my daughter. How am I going to get my gambling habit together? Or I'm going to, if all those frustrations are to fulfill some material desire, some gross desire, that desire degrades me. This desire that you have is lifting you higher and higher and higher, and it will never be satiated. That is a devotee mindset, but it is lifting you up, and you're inspiring all of us. Thank you.
I like that, Robert. I like the way that I like the example that you gave of you're trying to take care of your kids during the kirtan, because and I like the idea of reframing it, because the idea is we want, here's our goal. From the time we wake up in the morning to the time that we go to sleep at night, the Bhakti-yogi, they want to keep their mind engaged in serving God, right? Now, that may not look like the stereotypical yogi way. Like you were thinking, my mind should be, I should be sitting there in the temple, my eyes should be closed, and my mind should be completely absorbed in the song. And we definitely want to do that. But the fact was that your mind was engaged in caring for your children in that atmosphere so that they could benefit from it. And so you, in another way, your mind was engaged, and even you were having trouble doing it. It's still, when you went to bed that night, you could say, from the time you got up to the time you went to bed, you're just engaged in service, and you had
Thinking
your
about
mind
how to
engaged in
give
service.
your children bhakti.
Yeah. And there's a story about my guru who was, he was involved in, there's a whole history of establishing the Juhu temple in Mumbai. And it was just a constant battle on so many levels, including legal battles. And my guru, who was a sannyasi at the time, he went to Srila Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, my whole day is like just engaged in these legal battles. It's like, I'm thinking as a sannyasi, I should be reading more Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. And, I know the Mumbai law books better than I know the Bhagavatam, and Prabhupada kind of reassured him, no, you're serving, you're engaging your mind deeply in service. He said, and the anxiety that you feel in that service, he said, that is Krishna anxiety, and you should purchase it at any price.
Ooh, I like
Right?
that. Anxiety.
Krishna anxiety. Okay. All right. You gonna read me one?
Yeah, now it's your turn, and this is from Hunter.
Okay.
Via email, wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com. After many years of great difficulty, my wife and I found out we were pregnant about 3.5 months ago. After so much planning, excitement, and anticipation, we suffered a miscarriage this past week, and I've lost the baby. It's heartbreaking, I'm sorry. I think about what a special soul this child must have been to come to teach us about true, unwavering love and devotion. A love and devotion for a child without the material rewards of doing all the things with their children that prospective parents imagine doing before their child is born. I think about how advanced this soul must have been to come here, teach us these lessons, and then be called back to Krishna before ever having had the chance to get caught up in the various struggles and nonsense of this material world. Great way to see it. I know I must ultimately be grateful for these lessons and this time with the child, and I understand that this was the only way the situation could and would be. Yet at the same time, I feel crushing sadness over the situation, and I try as I might to fill this time with spiritual study and service and support for my wife. I cannot deny or mitigate this extreme pain of mind. In the hospital, I collapsed, literally passed out, overwhelmed with shock and grief. I thought of Arjuna and his mental breakdown. He needed to let Krishna drive the chariot. I know I need to let Krishna drive the chariot too. I understand that to truly accept God and the nature of this life, one must surrender their notion of being able to entirely control anything. Great letter. And the Vedic perspective has helped me understand this situation in a far more constructive than simply assuming this is a cold, random event. Yet try as I may to intellectually accept these circumstances, my mind is riddled with grief. My question, How does one go about constructively managing grief and sorrow after one has already intellectually accepted these principles that we are not in control and that we must accept seemingly bitter circumstances and learn to grow from them? How do we train our minds to embrace and transcend this grief when it feels endless and immovable? What a powerful question. What a sanguine and relevant question. Thank you.
It is. Thank you, Hunter, and my my heart goes out to you and your family. I like the way that Hunter presents this. How does one go about constructively managing grief and sorrow after one has already intellectually accepted these principles, right? Intellectually. Theoretically, I've accepted this. I've accepted that everything here is temporary, et cetera, et cetera. Theoretically, I've accepted that, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to have these feelings, right? So, I've intellectually accepted these principles that we're not in control and that we must accept seemingly bitter circumstances and learn to grow from them. At the same time, I'm feeling the grief. There's no question about it, And I think one could ask themselves, and maybe Hunter's doing that here, does it mean, am I practicing wrong if I'm feeling this grief? Is it a manifestation of my lack of spiritual understanding? Should I be consciously trying not to feel these things? And my response to that would be, it's not wrong for you to feel these feelings. And as you're feeling them, you don't have to be in an intellectual battle to try to let go of those feelings. It's a common misunderstanding to equate renunciation, or you could say detachment, and bhakti. Detachment and bhakti are not the same thing. We, as bhakti yogis, we see bhakti, prema bhakti, pure love of God, as the ultimate spiritual destination. That's what we're aiming for. And what that looks like is not necessarily detachment, but it's ultimately love, right? It's devotion. As long as devotion is there and you're feeling devotion even through that grief, then let the grief play out its purpose. When the bitterness of this world, brings you to deeper levels of surrender, then there's a sweetness that grows out of that bitterness. And that sweetness is your intimacy with God. So if we were able to look at our lives, maybe it would be over, like, imagine that we had transcended this material world and had achieved the goal of bhakti and the goal of spiritual life. And we're free of all of our material attachments, and our innate love of God had fully manifested in us. And we were able to look back at our spiritual path, and it might play out over several lifetimes. And I would imagine that what we would commonly see is that at a certain point we started developing faith. And at a certain point, that faith deepened into, association with deep spiritual people. And then it grew still more into like a serious type of practice, and then we would find in the course of that life or those lifetimes, events, right? Events that entered in and shook up our lives. And some of those events would be ones like Hunter's bringing up here that cause feelings of great loss or grief. And we would see we would be able to see how those events, how we applied what we were learning and practicing in context of those events, and how that reshaped us. It reshaped our minds, it reshaped our hearts. Where those events could have made us a hardened, bitter person, because we had all of that practice and all of that knowledge and all that association. Rather, those events softened us, right? They softened the heart, and they increased the dependence and the connection and the intimacy with God, because those events pushed us to speak to God, to hear God, to pray to God, to try to understand God, to hear the voice of God, which we might have been lax on otherwise. And so it's and when that happens, and as those, and we might even see like a series of those events, and the first one didn't deepen us or soften us too much, and the second one maybe a little bit more, and by the third one we were understanding life more deeply, and it was really starting to soften us and change us. And in that time, through that experience of the softening of the heart, we would actually become much more faithful, and in that relationship with God, in the mind and the heart, that the communication would go much deeper. And even though it was in a time of pain or suffering, the intimacy of that connection, it churns a sweetness out of that bitterness that's unlike anything else in the world. And so therefore, my answer to Hunter is, don't worry that you're feeling grief. There's nothing more natural in the world for you to feel grief through an experience like this. Let that grief bring you closer to God, right? Let it soften your mind, let it soften your heart, and let it shape you. In the Gita, Krishna says, in the second chapter, 14th and 15th text, he says, the non-permanent happiness and the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and the disappearance of the winter and summer seasons. We know winter is going to come, and then we know summer is going to come after that. We don't have to worry about that. We know that they come and they go. He says they arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them. You learn to tolerate them. And then he says, the person who's not disturbed by happiness and distress, but is steady in both, is certainly eligible for liberation. But that doesn't necessarily mean like cold stoicism. It means steady in both means I turn to God whether there's happiness, I turn to God whether there's distress. I turn to God under all different circumstances. That's the steadiness for the Bhakti-yogi, right? It's not that I don't feel grief, but it's I turn to God when times are good, and even when times are bad, I again turn to God. And it's that type of steadiness that the Bhakti-yogi is interested in. And that's called surrender, ultimately. God is my protector. God is my provider. Whatever, under all circumstances, I'm always turning and reconnecting. I think, Hunter, if you focus on that, see the pain that you're feeling as a type, certainly a bitter medicine, but a medicine nonetheless. And don't be afraid to take it, and don't feel guilty that you're tasting it, because that's natural. But it will, if you turn to God through it all, if you turn to the devotees of God to help you through it, if you turn to the pages of the Bhagavatam and the Gita to deepen your understanding of it, then it will soften you, and that bitterness will become sweet. And this very painful episode in your life will have a very deep meaning for you, and you'll understand it more deeply as you grow. And I will leave it there.
That was a beautiful, perfect question, perfect answer. Thank you, Kaustubha.
Thank you.
I'm lucky. I am lucky I have you in my life.
Oh, Raghu.
I'm lucky.
Well, now I want to hear from you.
I'm serious.
You ready?
What you got? What you got for me?
I got a question coming from... Oh, this is kind of two questions on one subject. We're going to talk a little bit about Jesus because it's Sunday. You ready?
Jesus! You try to believe there's things that save you. You really do believe this talk of God is true. You know what I'm talking about?
I assume it's Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I learned the whole Bible from Jesus Christ Superstar.
Well, we're about to find out how well you know it, because this one's about Jesus.
Man, okay, I'm ready.
There's two questions. First one's from Harold Brissy via Patreon. He writes, why is Jesus not recognized as an avatar of Vishnu? Certainly, Christianity is the #1 religion. Buddha is recognized, and the third religion in membership. Hinduism is fourth. Okay. I love Krishna, but follow Buddhist and Christian teachings, kind of like Vishnuism, Bhakti Vishnu. Okay, so his question is, why isn't Jesus recognized as an avatar of Vishnu? We also have a question from Andreas Dieters from Cologne, Germany.
Cologne.
So I think that the first question is kind of within this one too. He says, next week, Christians begin to celebrate the advent of Christ. So this gets me wondering, who is Jesus? Some people say he was a man who went to India to study yoga and achieved siddhis, mystic perfections, which explains why he could turn water into wine and so on. But if so, what about the Immaculate Conception, right?
Yeah.
Some people say he is God, but in what sense exactly? Was he an avatar of Krishna? But if so, which kind? Shaktivesha, Leela, Yuga?
I like
The Roman Catholic Church says Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit are identical and different at the same time. Does this have something to do with Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, the philosophy of simultaneous oneness and difference? How do the great Bhakti sages answer this question? Did Srila Prabhupada say anything about this topic? Is Jesus even predicted in the Vedic texts? I find the Vedic wisdom so incredibly detailed that I hope to find answers here. I would be deeply grateful to you if you could answer this question. Thank you so much for the great work you're doing on a daily basis.
Great question. That's a great. How many people listening on Zoom, and you can put this on the board, feel like they understand the New Testament better after studying the Bhagavatam? I feel like I really understand the New Testament in a very deep, broad-minded way. And I feel like I can go just have a nice, deep conversation on Christianity and the benefits of Christianity and support Christianity better than I could when I was a Christian. I always tell that story when I came back from India with a shaved head and robes on Christmas Eve to my Italian family. My mother looked at me and said, "Why don't you just become a Christian priest?" And I said, "I am a Christian priest."
You didn't buy it. She didn't buy it.
She didn't buy that, but that's how I truly feel. I truly feel like I was a Christian priest because we're going right for the essence. Bhakti teaches the essence. What's the essence of, and what's the essence of Christianity? Is it to heal sick? Is it to magical tricks of turning water? Is it levitation so you could walk across water? No, the goal is to love God with your heart, mind, and soul. That is the very definition of Bhakti Yoga, to love God with your heart, mind, and soul. Krishna says in the Gita, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, in the 4th chapter, wherever and whenever there is a decrease in dharma, a decrease in dharma and a rise in adharma. Whenever there's a rise in adharma and a decrease in dharma, at that time I manifest. So Krishna either manifests himself or he empowers people to lift up culture. And sometimes it's through a certain amount of potency, and I don't know how to measure. I don't know what the measuring tape is to figure out, is this person fully God? Is he partially God? Is she empowered by God? Does he have, you know what I mean? I don't know how to measure that. And I don't think anybody has a definitive answer. And Christ was from an entire another culture, which is why it's not necessarily predicted in the Vedas. There's been people who have spiritually uplifted people all over the world. Kaustubha spiritually uplifts me on a regular basis, right? So we are all sons of God and daughters of God. We are all parts and parcels of God. But when you dedicate yourself to spiritual life, then you become a light to take away darkness. Christ is, as far as I'm concerned, what he said he was. I am the Son of God. I'm seated at the right hand of the Father. So this is the idea of guru. Is the guru God? In the Vedas, they say you got to treat the guru like God. What? But they also say the guru is different than God. So the guru is God. Why? Because they speak the message of God, and therefore we have to have respect for guru. And the guru also is not God. This is the achintya, the simultaneously one and different. He's not God because he's actually not separate in thoughts and in actions, but help me out here, Kaustubha. I'm hitting a wall.
Not separate and hard. Well, but still an individual, right?
But still an individual soul. Still an individual soul. So we all are pure devotees of God, but we just forgot, and we're trying to act out some material fantasy. When we get to this point, where we realize this material world is not my home. I have a deeper connection with everybody, with my family members, with my pets, with my work in the workplace, with my relatives, with my parents. I have a much deeper relationship than she is my mom and I'm in the sun. We have a much, when you start seeing everybody out there as a pure individual, you start to change the way you see the world, and you start to less rely on the world to fulfill your emptiness, and you start to fill it with spiritual food, spiritual information, spiritual activities. And a lot of you can already say, who listen to this podcast on a regular basis, the same pleasures you found pleasurable last year or 2 years ago are not pleasurable anymore. You've given up the taste for those types of pleasures. They go ill together with the new upgraded version of you. I mean, I can say that in my own life. There's a new upgraded version of me in 2020 that's different than when I was in 2017. And those same habits of 2017 won't work the same. What to speak of 1983? That's a different version of the Raghunath machine, you know? So Christ, as far as I see, is from another culture, but giving people these messages of truth. And whenever you hear messages of truth, you can say, hey, these are coming from God. And it doesn't matter what package it comes in. Truth is truth. And truth is for all people. No one religion has a monopoly on truth. And so you got to find truth where you get it and imbibe it. And I just personally I fell in love with Vedic culture because for me it didn't say look, you start worshiping our God, forget about that God, put this costume on, forget about that costume. In Bhakti, it teaches get rid of the costumes. It's ultimately got nothing to do with your costume you're wearing or the haircut you have. It's got to do with the sentiment of your heart. God is one. We are tiny, and we are part of something bigger. To resurrect God in the center of your life. This is what it means to be spiritualist. This is what it means to be a chosen person. You don't get born into being a chosen person. Chosen person is when you choose divinity as opposing choosing material life. Thank you very much.
I try. Yeah, I'll just add to that Prabhupada, there was one of the questions, what did Prabhupada say anything about this? And Prabhupada said so much about Jesus. And if you just Google, what did Prabhupada say about Jesus, you'll find a lot of stuff. But he did say he was Shaktivesha avatar, which means a being that's particularly and specially empowered to spread God consciousness.
Won't necessarily be mentioned in all this. In the same way, a lot of the avatars of God is unlimited, therefore his forms are unlimited, and then there's unlimited avatars that we've never even heard about. Isn't that interesting? We never heard about them. That doesn't mean they don't exist. So in the same way, there may be people empowered. They have the Shakti of Vishnu, but they're not necessarily named in the sacred literature.
And Nityananda Chandra is saying that the Bhavishya Purana speaks at length about Jesus.
Yeah, that's what Satyaraj says too.
Yeah, I forget what it says though.
I forget what it says.
That Purana.
Jesus is here.
Okay, I think we may be out of time, Raghu. Do you need to run off somewhere, don't you?
No. Let's use this question to you.
Okay, we'll do one last question.
Okay. It's tomorrow. I realized it's tomorrow.
Ah.
Okay. Why is Jesus... No, that was not that one.
We just did that one.
Let's do it again. Let's do Jesus questions all day long for the holiday.
I noticed Clifford Dean is trimming the tree over there too. I saw earlier. There he is. Yeah, there's a tree. Clifford Dean. Yeah, there they are.
Trim that tree.
Trimming the tree.
My respectful obeisances to you all. This question is for Kaustubha. Wait a second. Whenever they start with that, I think, what have I done so wrong?
Come on.
Directed towards Kaustubha only. Okay, whatever. Whatever, Mohan, Podell. Okay. Before asking this question, I want to give you a little bit of my background so you can express the esoteric side while answering my question. I grew up in a Hindu family in Nepal. A lot of Buddhists and Hindus in Nepal. Even though I grew up in a Hindu family, from my childhood, I always questioned God's existence. except when I got in trouble. Laugh out loud. I grew up watching the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Shiva Purana, the Vishnu Purana on TV. Isn't it great? We grew up on Gilligan's Island, the Brady Bunch. He grew up on the Shiva Purana on TV. In a little bit different culture. But you know what's great is we are all getting into bhakti in a very pure way, coming from so many different places in life. That is the beautiful thing. Punk rock, gardeners, we're older, we're younger, we're kids.
Television watchers.
Yeah, Nepalese television watchers. So I thought, after watching all this stuff, the town I grew up in had no Vishnu temple, but I thought Shiva was the creator, or at least that Vishnu and Shiva are the same. But when I read the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Prabhupada, he said that Shiva was a demigod, and I was in shock. When I started questioning and searching about this on the internet, that's what he was. Okay. My wife and...
Then I started
searching. Sorry about that. My wife and my in-laws are Vishista Vaishnava, Ramanujacharya lineage. So the wife, they're all devotees of Vishnu. My father-in-law tried to convince me that Lord Shiva is the Maha Vishnu, the great devotee, but I was not convinced. It took me over 6 months to come to the conclusion that Lord Shiva is the Maha devotee, or the Maha devotee of Vishnu. I tried to realize God many times and have fallen many times. I have been just back and forth with believing in God and not believing in God. For about the last 12 years, I was kind of an atheist, but I could not be completely an atheist because of all those Mahabharata, Ramayana was ingrained into my brain during my childhood. Just like our good buddy Nitai Lieberman, keep on reading that, right? Keep on reading the Mahabharata. That's the problem with hearing truth on a regular basis. It starts to become part of you. So far, my knowledge about the living body is in the Advaita perspective. So if you could please explain to me in detail about the Shushma Sharira, or the subtle body and the mind consciousness and the paramatma in the dual perspective. Right? I finally came to the conclusion that Krishna, Vishnu, and Narayan are the same thing. Then you guys mentioned there are 3 Vishnus. It's really going down here. I am so confused by this. If possible, please explain this as well. Thank you. I'm glad he asked Kaustubha also. Thank you, Mohan. I'm on it.
Thank you, Mohan. Well, thanks for sharing the whole story. There's actually much more to that story. I had to edit it out because there's so much, but I appreciate Mohan sharing so much. Would love to visit you out there in Nepal. Have you been to Nepal?
No, if we go to India on pilgrimage in March, which is still up in the air, then we will go to Nepal on a pilgrimage, studying Ram Leela, and it's trekking too. There's a lot of beautiful ancient Vaishnav temples there. That's where Muktinath is, which is a holy place for Jains, Buddhists, and devotees of Vishnu. That's where you find the Shalagram Shilas. Mm-hmm. And
the Gandaki.
And then Gandaki River is there, a holy river. And also a city called Bhaktipur is there, with all these it's beautiful ancient places. And these were all ancient Hindu kingdoms, before. And Nepal is a different country, of course, but all over Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nagaland. I guess Nagaland's still in India, but these are all ancient Hindu kingdoms.
Okay. So let's focus on the 2 questions that Mohan asked. First one, he said, so far my knowledge about the living body is in the Advaita perspective. That's referring to a particular school of philosophy that interprets Vedanta in a particular way. So if you could please explain to me in detail about the Shushma Sharira, the subtle body, the mind and consciousness, and the Paramatma in the dual perspective. In other words, the Advaita perspective is every one of us is God. We've just lost touch with it. Whereas the dual one says, no, we're not God. We're the energy of God. We're the same energy as God, but we always have our own individual identity. Okay. So, it's relatively simple, right? The Vaishnava perspective is that the Atma is eternally an individual. You'll find that in all throughout the Bhagavad Gita, to take for instance text 15:7, right? Mamaya Vangso Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, that eternally Sanatana, that the jivas are my eternal fragmental parts, right? Angsas, they're parts, but they're individual. They have an individual identity, not temporarily, not only in a state of illusion are they perceiving that they have an individuality, an individual identity, but sanatana, eternally, they have their individuality. And then the body, there's the physical body, that we can see and touch. And then there's the subtle body, the mind, right? The consciousness of the Atma, it's kind of like shines its light through the mind and through the body. So although the body is dead, and even the mind itself is just a machine, a very subtle machine, it's the life of the consciousness, or I'm sorry, the life of the Atma, the eternal life of the Atma, that shines consciousness, through the body, through the mind, and make the body and mind appear to be alive, although they're just vehicles that are temporarily being used. And then, so within every living body, there's the Atma, that individual soul. It has a relationship with God, but it's lost touch with it, although God is seated right next to the Atma in that body as the paramatma, right? The supreme soul. And that paramatma, just as my consciousness it's said in the Upanishads that within the cave of the heart exists the Atma. And as the blood comes through that region of the body, it gathers energy from the Atma, and that energy manifests throughout the body as consciousness. So wherever the blood flows, consciousness or awareness is flowing. And then, of course, right next to us, right there in that heart, is that Paramatma. That's Lord Vishnu himself. We're using this machinery of the body and the mind, moving through the world, trying to use the material energy for our own, to enjoy through the body and the mind, right? I need this resource, this material resource. I'll find my happiness and my pleasures and my enjoyment through connection of my senses of my body to the material energy in so many different forms and shapes. And when I have that contact of the senses with that energy, I'll experience something in the mind that we call pleasure. And I think the goal of life is to make those physical connections so that I enjoy within the mind. But the Paramatma is there, all along, waiting for us to turn back and recognize that whatever thrills we get out of this material energy, it's always followed by some sort of feeling of loss or sorrow. And when we turn to that Atma, to that Paramatma within the heart, then we can reconnect and have our true spiritual life. And this is important. And this is where there's a difference between the Advaitin idea and the devotional Vedanta. In the Advaitins believe that we are the Paramatma, right? Whereas the devotees, they believe that I'm never the Paramatma. The Paramatma is unlimited. I'm very limited. My consciousness spreads throughout this little body. The Paramatma's consciousness spreads through every body, right? And that's an eternal difference, right? So that's something on that. And, I recommend, if you want to go into this deeper, read Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13. So much is there on that, especially if you read Srila Prabhupada's commentaries along with that. Chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita will fill you in a lot on that. And then the next question was, he says, I finally came to the conclusion that Krishna, Vishnu, Narayan, they're the same thing. Then you guys mentioned that there are 3 Vishnus and Maha Vishnu. I am so confused by this. If possible, please explain this as well. I'll do so briefly. When we think of Krishna, Krishna is the source of all the other manifestations, right? Even all the other Vishnu manifestations, all the other avatars, they come from that sweet
baby Krishna.
Sweet baby Krishna, right? That cowherd boy, right? He is he is Krishna. That's God manifesting his everything. All of it is there in that form. And his only interests, he has no interest in creation. He has no interest in maintenance. He has no interest in destruction. He has no interest in the material energy whatsoever. His interest, his only interest, is the adventures of divine love that take place within his internal spiritual energy that is untinged by any sense of materialism or selfishness. His entire energy is there. It's with his devotees in the spiritual realm. Now, some of us, because we have that individuality that I spoke of earlier, we've chosen with our free will, I don't want to be part of that necessarily. I want to enjoy as if I were God. And in order to do that, we have the material realm to play in, you could say. And so to facilitate that desire, just like, and I've shared this analogy before, say little Rooney, Raghu's son, wants to enjoy the tractor. He wants to drive the tractor. I want to drive. But Raghu knows it's not possible for him to drive the tractor. So Raghu has to create an illusory tractor for him, a toy tractor, right? He's got to facilitate that in order to facilitate Rooney's desire. In a similar way, the material world is the facility provided by Krishna for us to enjoy, but he doesn't deal with it personally, right? He either empowers the devas to take care of that realm, or he takes care of it through his expansion of Lord Vishnu. And Lord Vishnu manifests in three different ways, right? In this sense. First, there's Maha Vishnu. If the entire material realm were a big bubble in the spiritual sky, he is the soul of that big, huge bubble. It's his consciousness and his energy that gives life to the entire thing. Maha Vishnu, he's lying in the water in that bubble of the material realm. And out of his pores of his skin, it is said, unlimited universes come, each one like another bubble. Then he enters it. So the first Vishnu, Maha Vishnu, sometimes called Karnadakshaya Vishnu, that Maha Vishnu is the source of all the universes within the material realm. Then within each one of those universes, he expands a second time, second Lord Vishnu manifestation. And that manifestation is the one that gives birth to Lord Brahma within each individual universe. Brahma is a jiva, right? He's an individual soul like you or I, eternally independent. And he becomes the creator of that, the engineer of that universe, you could say. And what does he engineer? He engineers all the bodies of all the different living entities, all the humans, all the humanoids, all the plants, all the different forms, all the different species. They're engineered. They're all machines. And they're engineered by Lord Brahma. He's the one that creates the prototypes and et cetera, et cetera. And so then we've had Lord Vishnu expand first. The first expansion was his Maha Vishnu, soul of the universe. The universe has come out of him. Second one was Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, who gives birth to Brahma. And then all those bodies that Brahma creates, the third Vishnu, Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, or the paramatma, the super soul, enters into each and every one of those bodies. So Lord Vishnu, this expansion of Krishna, is taking care of the maintenance of this world. And by being Paramatma, he's arranging for our karma. He's arranging for all of our experiences in this world. He's monitoring our thoughts, our desires, and he's shifting things to suit that exactly. But Krishna, the boy Krishna, right? Bhagavan, Svayam Bhagavan Krishna, he's always playing in the spiritual world, always absorbed in pastimes of love, because that's what he's into. And so in a nutshell, that's kind of what it's about. If you read Srila Prabhupada's books, read Krishna book, it'll inform you more and more and more on all this kind of thing.
You think animals with paramatmas can listen to the paramatma?
Well,
you know how like when we tune in, so to speak, we advance in yoga, so to speak, we're hearing the instructions, or we're connecting with Paramatma. The Paramatma is directing us. The Super Soul is directing us. What about with animals?
What about those turtles?
What about the turtles? Yeah, the turtles.
Baby turtles, right?
You think it's so? That's the idea. Is that it's the what we call instinct. You would just say is Paramatma directing the instinct. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's reasonable.
Baby turtles.
Well, you know what I think about that, my friend?
Time to dance.
It's time to dance!
Hey, what about tomorrow? Who we got on the show?
We've got special. It's Tukaram Day, the day we've all been waiting for. One of my best friends in the world, Tukaram, from Los Angeles. He runs the temple community in Laguna Beach. I think he's the smartest guy I've ever met. And he just, if you have a lot of good questions, bring them. A lot of you guys already love to from. But he's a sharp cookie. And if you've got any good philosophical questions, he's like the smartest person I've ever met, I think. And he's a great soul. And I think you're going to love him. But so don't miss out tomorrow's show. Seriously, 8 o'clock tomorrow Eastern Time. Thanks everybody for joining us on Zoom. If you're one of the others listening to us on Apple Podcasts, etc., I want you to get our Zoom codes at wisdomofthesages188@gmail.com. Also, go to Apple Podcasts. You got to do this if you haven't. And you have to write a review and tell us your story, how you got into Bhakti, or your spiritual journey. Also, if there's some little nugget of information that you learned, some information that you learned today, write it down on your little iPhone, take a picture of it, tag Wisdom of the Sages and Raghunath, and post it, and then we will resend it. It's sending out these little pieces of wisdom that we hear and we read that can change somebody's day today. We want to spread this type of love, this wisdom around. Make it go viral, so to speak. Now, we dance.